Hey guys, Texas Slim here with the Beef Initiative, and we are kicking off our inaugural education series that is focused directly on Bitcoin. The Beef Initiative is partnered up with Foundation, and we've been putting together a curriculum. Today we have Lily, and we have Q&A from Foundation. And what we have come to the conclusion is there's a lot of education out there within Bitcoin. A lot of it is not overly structured or directly focused to certain types of industries. I've been working with ranchers for over 2 years now, as far as working with the decentralization of our food supplies in a way, and educating them on the Bitcoin ethos, the Bitcoin standard, and of course the why of Bitcoin. I believe gets lost in the conversations and in the narrative of why would a rancher, animal producer in North America or anywhere else around the world, why would they want or need Bitcoin? So working with Foundation, working with Lily and Q&A, we discovered that the best place to start is basically the source of the seed of the why. Times have changed in our lifestyle, our lives, for all of us, from certain generations to the other generations. We know one thing, that the dollar has been debased extremely in the last 50 years since we went off the gold standard. I believe that this is a good place to start, is looking at our monetary systems, looking at certain things that affect the livelihood and the empowerment of the American rancher, and letting them understand that, Bitcoin is really a new store of value that they've probably been searching for a long time. And in the past, it was maybe the value of the cow or the value of the ranch was in the land. At certain times, it's been the value of the cow was in the cow itself. And when you come across many conversations with different ranchers to this day, a lot of them cannot understand or describe what the value of the cow is. Is it the USDA insurance policy? Is it in the land they might own? Where is it? We don't know yet. But what we're going to do is we're going to take a look. We're going to look at Bitcoin from the ground up, and we're going to help educate and move forward with a webinar series that will allow the American rancher and anybody else that wants to participate to find out the why of Bitcoin for them, the individual sovereign self. By saying that, this webinar series will have a playback, of course, and we can share it. We can share it to families and friends and anybody you want. I believe it's a very focused educational series that is not too complex. It's not going to be overly technical. It's going to speak in certain ways and languages and understanding that maybe the rancher can understand. And we can, this is a low time preference. This is not an instant gratification type of educational series, but it is a great foundation to, if you have some curiosity, if you need additional answers, this will be able to spawn you off in many different directions to where you can actually feel pretty confident in your decisions and how Bitcoin can help you, the American rancher. So saying that, we have Lily, she'll be in the background, and we also have Q&A. He's going to be leading our slideshow today. And if you have any questions, you raise your hand, you put them in the chat room. After we've done with the slideshows today, we'll go and review the chats, and we'll address each question individually, and we can move forward together, maybe with an open chat if we have enough time. We'd like to keep these things for right at an hour or under. We don't want to over inundate with information. And so on that note, Q&A, hey, how are you doing today? You are over in Europe. We appreciate you, everything you put together for us. And let's get started.
Hey Slim, thanks for the great introduction. Before I get cracking, I just want to double check that you can actually hear me and my voice is coming through okay, loud and clear.
You're good to go, Q&A.
Perfect. Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome to the Bitcoin for Ranchers webinar series. Today marks the first of 4 webinars offering newcomer-friendly Bitcoin education to help bridge the gap between sound health and sound money, with the hope to work towards a sound future for everyone. As Slim has already mentioned, each of these webinars will be around 60 minutes long, and we'll also include a question and answer session at the end. And to ask a question, you don't need to be on camera, you don't need to share any personal information, and you don't even need to speak if you don't want to. You're more than welcome to just pop them into the chat, and we'll pick them up at the end. Slim also correctly covered that we are recording these sessions so that anybody who misses out can recap, or even anybody that's here live can go and recap on any of the points that we're talking about today. Before we get started, I would just like to introduce myself. My name, my pseudonym, should I say, is Bitcoin Q&A. I'm from Europe, namely from the UK. I'm a Bitcoin sort of educator and the author of the website bitcoiner.guide, which is a collection of Bitcoin-related resources ranging from everything from privacy, self-custody, right straight back to the basics of, answering the simple questions of what Bitcoin is and how it can impact the world, some of which we'll be covering off today. And my day-to-day role, I'm head of support at Foundation Devices. With that, I'll just hand over to Lily to introduce herself.
Hey everyone, we're so excited to have you all join us today. I'm Lily. Aside from being head of business development at Foundation, I'm a Bitcoin content creator with a focus on Bitcoin privacy and self-sovereignty. I'm also a Bitcoin miner, so if you're interested in that area, you can find all my mining content pinned on my Twitter profile.
Okay, so before we get cracking with the main bulk of the content, I'll just give you a quick heads up as to who Foundation are and the team that Lily and I are part of. So our mission at Foundation is to build Bitcoin-centric tools that empower you to reclaim your sovereignty. Our team was established in 2020, so we're quite a young company. We've since grown to a team of 10, and our main focus is building beautiful and intuitive Bitcoin-focused technology. Initially, that was around hardware. We build hardware wallets, which is a form of a methodology of how you can hold your Bitcoin, which we'll actually be covering in the fourth webinar of this series. Our aim is to offer the best-in-class security device to look after your Bitcoin, and everything that we do is open source. So you can be sure that everything that we do is kind of out in the open and is auditable by literally anybody on the planet. And our main aim, aside from our mission that I've already covered off, is to help people take ownership of their money and of their data. And we are passionate about bringing sovereignty to individuals and businesses alike.
Yeah, I just wanted, before we kicked off the education, I just wanted to recap what we covered the past 2 weeks. The past 2 weeks we went over, why we are where we are, and it's clear that the source of increased U.S. political corruption, declining population health, and the loss of community is because of the money. In 1971, the Federal Reserve and the people close to it were given the power to take money from the future and use it to their benefit, and our children paid the price. But now we have an alternative. We have a way to take back our sovereignty, and that's with Bitcoin.
Okay, so this slide just covers a really brief outline of the course content. So this webinar series is broken down into 4 different webinars. Obviously, today being day 1, where we're going to be covering the absolute basics of Bitcoin. So what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin's importance. Lily's just touched on that there. We'll be covering off the absolute basics of how the network is loosely put together and how it functions and how that can benefit humanity. And finally, we're going to cap off with how you can get started by acquiring some Bitcoin. Next week, week 2, is going to be more focused on self-custody. So this is around how you can safely and securely look after your Bitcoin and have it in your own possession, which is somewhat of an alien concept today with modern central banking infrastructure. Week 3, we're going to move a bit more onto the practical of how we can use Bitcoin and how you guys can implement and use Bitcoin as a tool within your business. And finally, on week 4, we're focused more on sovereign security based around the tools and software that we at Foundation are building. We give you some demos on that, and hopefully we'll sort of make you realize that this whole ecosystem and holding your own keys is a common terminology that we use in the space, which will become clear over the course of the next 4 weeks isn't actually that scary. So today is Bitcoin Basics, week number 1. So very at a high level, we're going to be covering off what is Bitcoin, why Bitcoin is important, how it works, and how we can acquire Bitcoin. So those are the main 4 topics that we're going to cover off over the next 50 minutes. So we're going to start with what is Bitcoin. So at the top of each slide, you're going to see some quotes there from a pseudonym called Satoshi Nakamoto, who is the pseudonymous sort of creator of Bitcoin. So I've just included these just as a bit of fun, and also just to as an idea of how the creator of the system, although we don't know who he is, how he sort of looked on the system and the intentions that he had for that. So Bitcoin, put simply, is digital money. A digital money is something that we all use day to day and might not seem that groundbreaking, but Bitcoin sets itself apart in many reasons. The first and foremost is it's an open monetary network that you do not require any permission to interact with this network. Anybody with something as simple as a mobile phone can start to interact and use this sovereignty tool. Open source was a terminology I used previously. Again, that just means that the whole system and its nuts and bolts are all completely out in the open, and anybody can go and scrutinize that anytime that they like. Keeping on the subject of openness, all of the transactions that ever take place on Bitcoin are stored in a public ledger that anybody can have their own copy of. So again, we're starting to see a bit of a theme emerging here about openness and fairness, which is clearly one of Bitcoin's strong points. Now, Bitcoin is strictly peer-to-peer. What that essentially means is that it has a great knack for removing middlemen. So if I wanted to send Slim some Bitcoin, I don't need to ask any permission from anybody else. I can send that directly to him, which is incredibly powerful for reasons that we're going to come on to in a little bit. Obviously, with it being strictly peer-to-peer, there's no central point of control. There is no central bank. There's no head of Bitcoin. There's no Bitcoin help desk. It's strictly a decentralized, is another terminology that we like to use in the space. It's a decentralized system where there is no power. All people are created equal, and even if you were to come in with billions of dollars, as many people have, that doesn't necessarily give them any more power than somebody just starting out and getting to grips with the system. And the last couple of points that are key to touch on here is that Bitcoin has a fixed creation schedule, which again is quite an alien terminology for modern central bankers, unfortunately, as we've seen with the money printer going somewhat crazy in the last couple of years. And Bitcoin is provably scarce, which again, those of you who are familiar with gold and how gold is mined out of the earth, Bitcoin also has a very similar provable scarcity, and anybody who runs a free piece of software can actually go and verify the amount of Bitcoin that is in circulation at any time, literally on a really cheap piece of hardware that's, there's no central mainframe required to go and verify how many Bitcoin are in circulation, which, you can imagine trying to be able to do that with, working out how much gold there is in the world, or how many dollars are being printed. Your guess is as good as mine as to how many is floating around in the system. So that can be a very, very powerful tool, especially when we come into using Bitcoin as a savings vehicle. So talking about Bitcoin uses, so Bitcoin, as we've said in the previous slide, is digital money. So as a money, we will all be familiar with how we use money. We use it as a store of value. We sometimes we want to save for a rainy day, to buy a car, for some inheritance for our children. We need a method to store value. So Bitcoin is perfect for that. Again, as with most monies, Bitcoin is a great medium of exchange, so you can use it to buy goods and services. Moving on to permissionless value transfers. So transfer, excuse me. So this is where Bitcoin really starts to shine. So Bitcoin enables anybody that uses it to transfer value to anybody else that is also using this network, which again is an incredibly powerful tool for people who may live in oppressive regimes or in regimes where central bankers might look, how can I put it, who might want to prevent people from transacting with other people who they may or may not disagree with. Bitcoin has the potential to offer private payments. There's a little asterisk there because that kind of comes down as to how you use that, which is a little bit outside of the scope of day one of the slides, but it will become clear as we continue through the full 4 weeks of this webinar as to the nuances around that. Bitcoin also offers fast global settlement. On average, each transaction is confirmed within 10 minutes, which may not sound that fast if you were to walk into Starbucks and tap your debit card and think that you don't want to wait 10 minutes for that. But if you were to think about the fact that you could move $5 billion within 10 minutes and ensure that is absolutely final and cannot be reversed, then that's significantly faster than the current monetary system that we have to deal with, which for those sorts of payments could take weeks or even months. I've already touched on that Bitcoin removes middlemen. It's a decentralized peer-to-peer system, and there's no chargeback risks. So Bitcoin is what's known as a push system, where once that transaction has been broadcast and it's had a confirmation, which is essentially just that the transaction has been finalized, there is no way to reverse that transaction. That's how the network is built, and it's by design. I already touched on earlier that there's no Bitcoin help desk. There's no head of Bitcoin that you can call up to say that you've made a mistake with this transaction or somebody has stolen this Bitcoin. Once it's gone, it's gone. So there's a little bit of responsibility there. But for yourselves who may be merchants, that could be quite a desirable feature because we all know the chargeback fraud that goes on with credit cards, unfortunately. And finally, Bitcoin is financial access for all. I kind of touched on this really briefly earlier in the fact that anybody with access to a mobile phone can participate in this network. That's literally all you need to get started to receive Bitcoin and to send Bitcoin. There is no, you don't need to be an accredited investor. You don't need to be a banking institution. It's open, it's fair, and it's open to literally anybody on the planet with access to a mobile phone. And finally, it's true ownership. Once you have Bitcoin in a wallet where you control the private keys, again, another terminology which we'll come on to over the course of these webinars, once that's in your control, there's no IOUs, it's literally yours. Somebody would have to physically come into your house to, coerce you to try and send that Bitcoin elsewhere. It's not like today where if you have a bank account, if the bank or the Fed decides that they don't want you to have those numbers on that screen that represent your bank balance, then unfortunately they can. Admittedly, it doesn't happen in the US, thankfully, but it does elsewhere in the world. They could confiscate that at will. With Bitcoin, that becomes significantly more difficult, and obviously it cannot be done remotely. And I think, Lily, you just want to chime in here as well.
Yeah, I think that was a great explanation. You pretty much covered what I was going to mention, but I do want to say the only assets that you can take true ownership right now are Bitcoin and gold, because these are assets that nobody can freeze, like your bank account, and you can move them around with you. But the nice thing about Bitcoin is it has that extra layer where you can actually use it in transacting versus gold. It's very difficult to do that.
Yeah, definitely. There's a reason that true ownership is in capital letters there. It's once you kind of wrap your head around that, once you've got this Bitcoin in a wallet that you are in control of, it's incredibly difficult for anybody to take that off you. So yeah, that's a really sort of powerful one to kind of wrap your head around and understand. And again, after the course of these four webinars, anybody listening to this live or back will be, I'm sure, will be confident enough to take that true ownership and hold their own keys, as we say in the space. Okay, on to the next slide. So, why Bitcoin? Why is Bitcoin? Why would anybody listening to this or watching this want to use it? So, some of this we've already covered off. I'm just going to give a quick recap because these are kind of the properties of Bitcoin that make it worthwhile for, that will resonate. At least one of these will resonate with everybody that's watching this. So, number one, censorship resistance. Again, most people listening to this, I'm going to guess, are probably based in the US, where censorship in terms of their banking and their payments is not that big of an issue. Sadly, in other parts of the world, censorship through financial means, unfortunately, does happen. Perhaps a little bit closer to home for most people listening to this would be the example of the Canadian truckers, some of which were, they were all peacefully protesting, but some of which were identified and had their bank accounts frozen because they were protesting against the cause that was disagreeable to the people in power in Canada, which is obviously an incredibly unfortunate situation. But that's somewhat closer to home for most people that are watching this, and hopefully drives it home that this doesn't just happen the other side of the world. And unfortunately, the way that the world's going at the moment, it seems that financial censorship is starting to ramp up a little bit. With Bitcoin, as we've touched on, really, it's decentralized. You hold your own keys. You are the custodian of your money. You don't have to ask permission for anybody else to spend that Bitcoin whenever you like. It's an incredibly powerful property. Verifiably scarce, we've already touched on. I'm just going to move on to the next one now. Decentralized, which we've also covered. Trustless. So Bitcoin is trustless in the sense that when you want to make a transaction, again, due to the peer-to-peer nature of the network, you do not need to trust anybody to kind of make good on their promises. I'll use the example of you would have to put some trust into your bank to send the payment as and when you've instructed them to. Whether they do or do not do that is completely up to them. Unfortunately, they're the ones that hold all the power. Again, with Bitcoin, there's no middlemen. You don't need to trust anybody to do that. Another one with an asterisk next to it, unfortunately, is Bitcoin is pseudonymous. So at a network level, you don't need to give any details to start using Bitcoin and to send any transactions. Slim's just messaged me, says he cannot see my screen. Can anybody confirm if they can see my screen? Lily, are you there?
We cannot see your screen.
Yes, I can see it.
Somebody else has just said they can't. Okay.
Now we can, right when I said it.
Oh, you can now, was that, sorry?
We can now, yes, thank you.
Oh, perfect. I will carry on then. Feel free to pipe up again, anybody, if they do lose the connection. My connection looks okay now, but if anything drops out, just drop a message in the chat, and thank you for that, Slim. So where was I? Pseudonymous, yeah. So to use Bitcoin at a network level, you do not need to provide any information. There are no names on the blockchain. Again, another terminology that we'll come on to later. So if you want to use this system in an anonymous fashion, you absolutely can. The reason that the asterisk is there is that there are, depending on the way that you obtain Bitcoin, will depend on whether or not you have to provide the information to initially get that Bitcoin in the first place, through what we call a regulated exchange. Again, more on that later. Bitcoin is borderless. This is another incredibly powerful property of Bitcoin. So in the sense that if you I'll use another example of, if you're a holder of a US bank account and you wanted to pay me based in the UK, that is possible using the current banking rails, but I don't know if anybody here has actually tried to do that. It's not a quick process. It's not easy. And depending on the bank that you're sending from and sending to. There are sometimes questions asked over why you're sending internationally, and even when that is approved, unfortunately, well, in my experience, it's taken significantly longer than the 1 to 2 days it was promised, and sometimes it takes up to a week. Bitcoin knows no borders. Bitcoin it has no sense of, the lines that we draw on a map. So if I wanted to send some Bitcoin to Slim, who's based in the US, the other side of the planet from me, it doesn't matter where he's based. He could be sat next to me, or he could be the other side of the planet. The network knows no bounds of where we are in the planet. So there's no hoops to jump through in that sense. I've already covered that Bitcoin is fair and Bitcoin is secure. So Bitcoin is around 13 years old at the moment. It was conceived in 2009. And to date, there has never been a known hack of Bitcoin in the sense that a vulnerability has never been noticed within the open system that has ever been exploited. And to this day, we're talking billions of dollars that are at stake in terms of its security now. So although it's only got a short history, it's got a pretty good track record for its short history. And no central point of control. Again, that was just a recap there. I'll just quickly pause just in case Lily's got anything to jump in there before I move on.
No, it looks like you covered it.
Perfect. I will jump forward then. Okay, so we've got a lovely looking little table here. So we've covered some of the Bitcoin's properties in the previous slide. So this table here, I'm not going to run through it because I'm just a bit conscious of time. This table is from a fantastic article, an absolutely seminal piece from a chap called Vijay Boyapati, and it's called The Bullish Case for Bitcoin. And in this table, he lists out the properties of all of the money, or all of the popular forms of money that have ever existed. So obviously we've got what's known as fiat money, which encompasses physical cash and obviously the credit and debit cards that we use day to day. Prior to that, we were on a gold standard, and gold was money. And hopefully, if we're all right about this, then the next new standard that is starting to emerge is obviously Bitcoin. And he's rated these all of these properties against each other. And there's just a couple I just want to quickly touch on before we move on to the next slide. So Bitcoin is portable. The second row there gets an A+. And I just want to explain why that is. So let's say we have a family in a war-torn regime. Obviously, unfortunately, there are some war-torn regimes still to this day, and they need to flee the country, and they want to take all of their wealth with them. Obviously, they're not going to be able to take many of their physical belongings because the chances are they're going to be on foot. Let's say all of their wealth is stored in gold, because we know that gold is a great store of value. It's held its value fairly well over time. They're only going to be able to carry certain amounts of gold, in their pockets or hidden in a bag before that's going to get noticed. And even if they haven't got a lot hidden away as they go to cross the border to seek asylum elsewhere, unfortunately, we hear time and time again that I've just seen that we've lost the slides again. Lily, do you want to present your side as well? I don't know whether we can do a dual screen share just in case mine drops out.
Let me see. You said we can do dual screen share?
I think what's best is if you present the slides and I'll just talk over the top of them, because I think it's my connection. So thank you to whoever popped up and said that we've lost them. So yeah, Lily, if you want to open the slides full screen and share your screen, I'll talk over the top of them.
1 second.
Yeah, apologies for this, guys. Wonders of modern technology. So I can carry on talking just for a while, just while Lily's taking over the screen share. So we're talking about gold and fleeing a country. So yeah, unfortunately, we hear time and time again where families are fleeing with what, it might not be gold, it might be jewelry, anything of value. Unfortunately, that is quite regularly confiscated from corrupt border guards. And, we hear this from time and time again, unfortunately. Bitcoin is purely digital. You could have your Bitcoin saved onto a micro SD card. You could have it saved onto a USB stick, or you could even, and I'm not necessarily recommending this, but I know people that have actually deployed this before, they can just store their sort of master backup, their seed phrase, as we call it in the space, in their head. Which is quite an alien concept if you're kind of new to Bitcoin. But just by remembering 12 words in your head, you could cross a border with, it could be $100, it could be $100 million. And, the people who you're fleeing from and the border guards, whoever it may be that you come into contact with, have absolutely no idea that the value that you're taking with you. And for people who are in that position, that is incredible in terms of, being able to take their whole family's wealth with them in a form of digital money that they can carry in their head. That is a piece that it's just resonated with me and was one of the most fascinating things I sort of heard when I was first understanding about how this system works. We've talked about Bitcoin scarcity. It's verifiable because anybody can verify the exact amount down to 8 decimal places. How many Bitcoin are circulating at any time. They can run that 5 times a day if they like. And that is, there's no charge for that. You don't need to run any significant infrastructure to be able to do that. The final one I just want to touch on before we move on is Bitcoin's verifiability. So with Bitcoin, we have in the system a piece of software that you can run on any computer that you can use to kind of verify any of the Bitcoin that you receive and check that it plays by the rules of the network. How and why you would want to do that is kind of a little bit out of the scope of this conversation, but I just wanted to mention that it is possible, and that I'll use the analogy again of your bank account. You're at the mercy of the bank telling you how much you've got in your account at any time. Essentially, it's just numbers on a screen, which is all Bitcoin is essentially as well. It's just numbers on the screen. It's purely digital, but you are able to verify for yourself every single transaction that you ever receive if you wanted to go that far, and be sure that nobody's, if they're sending you some sats for some beef, you can verify that the sats that they're sending you are legitimate, and be able to do that purely in a sovereign way without needing to trust anybody else. Lily, is it any of the other points you want to hit on before you move on to the next slide?
I just wanted to mention that, Bitcoin really combines the best qualities of both gold and our current fiat system.
Yeah, so it's a great point that it's a physical bearer asset in the sense that you can hold those all important private keys, as I touched on earlier, in your head, on a piece of paper, on an SD card, and a USB stick, or as an application on your phone. It's what we call a bearer instrument, so that the person who's in control of that secret, it accesses all of the Bitcoin. Gold is exactly the same as that. It's a physical bearer asset. You either have the gold or you don't. But Bitcoin, as you can see from the table, kind of takes that great property of gold, but improves in terms of, it's incredibly more divisible. It's much easier to verify. It's a hell of a lot more portable, and it's verifiably scarce. Now, we know gold is scarce, of course, but its supply can be, it is susceptible to increases in supply and demand. If the gold price will shoot up if there's a lack of supply, and vice versa as well. So yeah, that's a great point, Lily. So if you want to move on to the next slide, I'll carry on. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to cover off the basic points here, but I know Lily's got some great points to make here as well. And this one should really make it hit home as to why Bitcoin is important and why we're having this conversation now, and why people like Slim and Lily and I are so passionate about this. Anybody that watches the news knows that the money printer is out of control. And I've got an unfortunately shocking fact that will drive this home. 80% of all of the US dollars that are in existence today were created in the 22 months after January 2020. 80% of all of the US dollars have been created in the last 2 years, less than the last 2 years, which is an absolutely staggering fact. And I had to check it at multiple sources when I initially read that. And understandably, that has increased inflation to record highs. You know, the US saw 8.3% inflation in May. Now, 8.3%, obviously we know that's a high number compared to what we've seen previously. But just to spell that out, what that does to any savings that anybody watching this has in their bank account, at an 8.3% inflation rate, the purchasing power of any savings that you've got in the bank gets cut in half in just 8 years. Again, that's an incredibly scary fact that, again, I had to double check when I initially read it. Your purchasing power gets cut in half in just 8 years. So for anybody who, is sitting on a pile of cash in the bank that wants to hand that down to their, some inheritance for their kids so they can, go and prosper, then unfortunately, 8.3% inflation is going to quickly disappear. It's I know Michael Saylor, who's one of the sort of public proponents of Bitcoin, likens cash in the bank to a melting ice cube, which I think is quite a good analogy at the moment. And obviously, with inflation at record highs, the cost of living is skyrocketing. It doesn't take a genius to work that one out. You look at the petrol pumps, you look at the price of the food in the supermarkets, and this is all being driven by that money printer that's going out of control. Some other quick points: we're unfortunately seeing increased censorship by big tech and by banks. There's increased government controls, again, not necessarily within the US, but in other parts of the world. Cash is being eroded, and we've got central bank digital currencies, which I'm sure is a term that everybody has heard at least once over the last couple of years. We've got central bank digital currencies looming, which kind of is a fast track to corruption and censorship, unfortunately. And yeah, is going to lead to the Chinification of the West, where we've got, all of your spends are tracked. Your bank accounts are owned by the central bank, and they can do with, give you access to your bank and remove that access at the click of a button, which is a really scary fact. So the bit at the bottom there says Bitcoin is a way to peacefully opt out of all of that. So I'll just pause while Lily adds some great points.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the CBDC debate, it's not just a fantasy anymore. So countries like China have already deployed and tested CBDCs. China's tested CBDCs with an expiration date, meaning that if you don't use that money in your account, it'll just disappear and become worthless. It's impossible to build wealth with a central bank digital currency. There's no security, and there's no privacy. So I think it's important to learn how to use Bitcoin, how to store it, and start putting a piece of your wealth in Bitcoin before the CBDCs start to creep into, Western society.
Yeah, great point. Okay, so we've covered the why, we've covered the what. So now I'm just going to cover off the how. So if you want to move on to the next slide, Lily, what I'm going to do here is walk you guys through what a basic Bitcoin transaction looks like at a very high level. I'm going to try and keep all of the terminology out of it, but I'm just going to talk you through the very high level process. So we've got two fictional characters. We've got Alice and we've got Bob. Alice is buying some beef from Bob. So she walks into Bob's store. She makes a transaction. Again, this can just be from a mobile application on her phone. And Bob says, yeah, that'll be this much Bitcoin for these steaks. Alice pops that into her phone, and she, what's known as broadcast to the network. That is essentially just pressing send. That is then broadcast to all of the participants in the network who validate the transaction and pass that on to everybody else who's participating. And again, just to reiterate, those participants could be everybody on this call. It could be your father, your mother, your sister, anybody who wants to participate and validate this transaction can do and can do so very cheaply as well. Miners who are Bitcoin transaction processors will also see these transactions and they get grouped together for processing. At that point, because the transaction has been sort of what we call gossiped around the network. And so everybody tells everybody they know about the transaction. They say, okay, Alice's wallet wants to send Bob this much Bitcoin. So subsequently, but because Bob is participating in this network, his wallet sees the incoming transaction and he'll say, oh, Alice's transaction is pending to you. Go for it. Next one, Lily. So one of the transaction processes very simply solves a math equation and sort of confirms all of the transactions that paid the highest fee. And that one of those transactions is Alice's to Bob. So she actually incentivized that transaction processor with a small fee, like a percentage of the transaction. And he, or the person who is processing that transaction, collects those fees as an incentive for performing that transaction processing. So again, as Bob's a participant in the network, his wallet will see it and it will show it's confirmed. So that's it, transaction complete. Bob can now, those funds are truly Bob's. No matter what Alice does, she can't sort of take that back and reverse those transactions. All of the other network participants will update their copy of the software so that everybody who's participating knows that Alice has given away some value to Bob and that Bob is now the true owner of those funds. And then Alice heads off to enjoy a delicious steak. And we've done all of that without any central trusted third party. The transaction processors are not a trusted third party. They can't block the transaction. They can't steal the funds. It's just the way that the network is structured. So there's no trusted party in the middle of that. So just a quick recap. Alice spent to Bob and she offered a fee to incentivize the miners who are the transaction processors. All of the network participants, which is anybody running the Bitcoin software, validated that Alice did have the money that she was trying to spend. After the transaction was confirmed, the whole network knows that Bob is now the new owner of those funds. And each of these transactions are grouped together in what's called a block, and we can get thousands of these in every single block. And just to quickly recap there, that each block, as we call it, is kind of estimated to, as I touched on earlier, to be processed every 10 minutes. So on average, one block will be generated every 10 minutes, which will include thousands of transactions. Okay, Lily. Okay, so the final point for today's talk is how can you guys get started and how can you acquire some Bitcoin? So there are two kind of methods that you can do this. There's the traditional method. We've got in brackets there KYC, which is a banking terminology called Know Your Customer, which I'm sure you may or may not have seen before. So we're going to come into these in more detail in a second. And the second option is a peer-to-peer method, quite analogous to Bitcoin, really, where the clue is in the name. It's where you might purchase from another person or another peer. In the space, we call that non-KYC. So all that essentially means is that you're not sort of going to a regulated entity and having to KYC yourself or provide that customer information to sort of sign up to an exchange and say, I'd like to buy this Bitcoin, please. So obviously, those just go back, Lily, sorry. Yeah, so there we go. So these acquisition methods will be tailored to each user's goals, and there's probably a place for both of these methods for anybody in the space. And obviously, they both come with their pros and cons, which we're going to quickly cover off now. So the traditional method, or what we call KYC Bitcoin, we've touched on Know Your Customer. So this is where you would go to a centralized exchange whose business it is to buy and sell Bitcoin to people like us. You have to, obviously, because these are regulated entities, you have to submit personal information to these people who you are trusting to look after that information. So that information generally looks something like your driver's license, a selfie, maybe a video of yourself, and sometimes they actually get to record your voice as well. So it's quite an invasive procedure in terms of the amount of information that you have to sign up to. I dare say that most of these companies don't actually want to do this, but unfortunately, because of the jurisdiction that they are in, they have to do that to abide by the laws where they operate. The pluses of going through this method is there's a fairly low barrier to entry. once you've provided that information, it'll literally be like an app on your phone, and you can click buy, link it to your debit card or your credit card, and just buy as much Bitcoin as you want. That can be a really small amount, it can be a large amount, and you can do regular buys as well. And these types of funds where you buy it from a regulated exchange can be easily used as loan collateral, which we've got covered off as in a later webinar. So moving on to the risks of KYC. So it's probably quite obvious. You're sharing all of that personal information with a regulated entity. Unfortunately, some of these exchanges have an absolutely abysmal record of storing this information. And the people who use these exchanges, their information is often hacked and leaked onto the internet, and is sometimes used by criminals, or can also be used, in what we call phishing attacks, where people will send you dodgy emails because they've got your information and they know you have some Bitcoin. They might try and get you to put your details into a dodgy website and try and steal your Bitcoin. Unfortunately, we see that from time to time, and that's because these regulated entities have their databases hacked and all of that customer information is leaked. And some of these on-ramps, unfortunately, actively work with chain surveillance firms who are, I guess, clues in the name. They are companies that try to de-anonymize people and follow the transactions and act as a surveillance network to try and piece together what's actually happening on the network when people transact. So some of the popular ways to obtain Bitcoin through these easy methods, some of these names will probably be familiar with to you guys in the US. We've got Cash App, Swan Bitcoin, Unchained Capital, and River Financial. All of these guys, I know I talked about hacks earlier. Thankfully, none of these guys have actually fallen prey to anything like that and have a pretty good track record. And one final warning is that, aside from these great companies who are all US based, there are thousands of other what we call altcoin casinos that will, when you sign up, will bombard you with the allure of buying things that are not Bitcoin, which generally speaking have a terrible track record and absolutely do not have all of the great properties that we've just discussed in this webinar. So moving on to no KYC Bitcoin. This is a method where you would purchase from another peer, and it generally doesn't involve central trusted third parties. So you're kind of not going to have to sign up to a central database. You don't need to provide a selfie with your driving license or your passport and do a video of yourself. There are various methods of this, and you get to choose what information you disclose based on who you want to trade with, essentially, because it's peer-to-peer. You're trading with another person and not a central regulated entity. Now, this can enable Bitcoin to be used like physical cash. When you draw some cash out of the bank, it doesn't have your name on it. Or if you find $10 on the street, it doesn't have your name on it, but you physically own that, and you can spend that anonymously again if you wanted to. Generally speaking, it is more difficult to obtain larger amounts of this, generally because you are buying from another person or another peer, and obviously that peer does not have the same liquidity as a multi-billion-dollar exchange. So some of the risks, again, there's obviously trade-offs. Some of the risk with buying via no KYC methods. So if you choose to do an in-person cash trade, of course, that is going to come with its own in-person risk. And, potentially you don't know who you're trading with. And if they know that you're coming to meet them with a wad of cash to buy some Bitcoin, that's going to be, there's going to be risk associated with that. So tread carefully if you do take that route. Online peer-to-peer methods are generally a little bit more difficult to use than the centralized options that we touched on earlier. And they do have dispute methods. And unfortunately, there are sometimes, admittedly very rarely, but there are sometimes nefarious actors that will try to attempt to scam you out of either your fiat cash or your Bitcoin if you're purchasing it. Thankfully, the way in which these decentralized exchanges are built is that they do have an escrow system, and there is some decentralized arbitration, so that it's not kind of a simple grab and snatch, if you like. There are checks and balances in place. And yeah, as I touched on, larger amounts are definitely more difficult to obtain. Generally speaking, because of the more private nature of no KYC, it can attract a premium over what we call the spot price, or the price that you would see on a regulated or centralized exchange. So finally, some ways to obtain. So there's more common ways to obtain some no KYC methods. So we've got online peer-to-peer markets. There's a couple there. One's called HODL and one's called BISC. This is just software that you run on your computer that connects you privately to other peers who want to sell Bitcoin. We've got ATMs. Again, there's a little asterisk next to that one. I'm sure you've all seen a Bitcoin ATM in a local fuel station, maybe, or a corner shop. Just be careful with these, because some of these ATMs do actually ask for verification. So you need to either know about that and be prepared to give it, or just look for an alternative machine that does not ask for that sort of information if you don't want to give that away. We've touched on in-person trades. Another great way is earning. I'm sure that we've got some merchants on the call here that sell goods and services. Obviously, earning and selling those goods and services for Bitcoin is a great way to obtain Bitcoin that you don't have to go through a centralized or regulated exchange. Lily touched earlier on mining. She's far more qualified than I am to tell you about that one, but that is a great way. Essentially, miners are the transaction processors that I was talking about earlier, and they earn Bitcoin by collecting fees for processing those transactions. And the last one is a really great option. Is that when you go out to dinner with friends, you could pick up the tab for the whole thing and say, yeah, just pay me back in Bitcoin. And that's a nice little way. Not only does it stoke the conversation, so you get to talk about Bitcoin, but it also means that they pay you back in sats or in Bitcoin, and you can obtain that again without having to provide any personal information.
I just wanted to make one comment. So if you're using non-KYC Bitcoin to exchange, for goods and services, and you're receiving that Bitcoin as part of a business, do know that you still have to report that, as part of, your taxes to the IRS. So just be mindful about, how you use non-KYC Bitcoin, and always keep records.
Yeah, great point. I would look at sort of non-KYC Bitcoin as you would physical cash. I think it's quite analogous to that in terms of, like you say, reporting and how it's managed. Definitely. I think that wraps us up to the end. Yes, it certainly does. So we're not doing badly for time. So I will probably open up the floor to questions. So feel free to pop your hand up. There should be a menu in your Jitsi window where you can pop your hand up, and I'll unmute your mic if you've got any questions to ask on anything that we've covered, or if anything wasn't clear. If you don't want to ask using voice, feel free to drop those into the chat, and I'll get Lily to read them out, and we can answer them there. So just while we're waiting for that, Slim, did you have anything you wanted to add, or Lily?
Actually, Q&A, I just want to kind of give perspective of everything as far as education. I think within Bitcoin education, from the first time I, kind of put my toe into education, I was really looking for something that I could kind of structure in my own understanding. And it's been, a couple of years since I've, of course, got into Bitcoin, and it reminds me when I first wrote about food intelligence, the first time the article I put out there, I had probably less than 10 people, that first saw it. And going into education, it's hard to kind of build the masses with education. I see Bitcoin education as something it's a very big opportunity for people that want to steward the responsibility of educating in the proper way. That this is a content library that we're creating here as well. The people that attend today, of course, they're small numbers. It's a small group of people that are starting off this message of education within the Bitcoin community and for the North American rancher by saying that this is something that spreads viral. Everything that the Beef Initiative has done has been a viral spread. It's not a marketing plan. It's not a centralized media push. This is the Bitcoin way. We leverage truth, we leverage honesty, and we try to get to the source of the seed of our understanding of food and now Bitcoin. And these things are coming together in a very kind of a nice way towards they become symbiotic in the long run. So as far as that, if you have questions, there's going to be the series. We're going to have at least a series for 4 on this one. Please spread this around. Let people know that they can be educated. One thing that I always get asked, we always, different books, different this. This is a very grassroots approach of educating people, understanding. A lot of people are too intimidated, or they're too afraid to say, "Hey, I don't know how to learn this. I'm not technically savvy." There's so many different rationalizations and justifications, and what we want to do is let everybody know that this is an open door policy, that this is an ongoing discussion. Once you do start adopting Bitcoin, that you can basically, you can leverage it and you can spread it around. Q&A looks like we just had a chat request.
Yes. So the question is, can the recordings be used in BTC Bitcoin meetups to educate small business, beef initiative, etc.? If so, how do you recommend? So I'm not sure whether this person's asking for permission to these slides. If that's the question, yes, absolutely. Of course, these will all be published that you can feel free to share anywhere and as regularly as you like. I'm not sure whether they're asking something different to that. But Lily, have you read the question? Have you seen it?
Yes, I just saw the question. It looks like he's asking if he can use the materials at meetups, and that's totally fine.
And if you were asking how to get hold of the slides, Lily, do you want to put our contact details up the slide at the start of the webinar? You can contact Lily or myself, and we'll happily send you a copy of the slides as well for use however you see fit. I think it's slide 2, Lily.
Yeah, I'll add that in, and then everyone who signed up for the emails will get a copy of the recording. So within that email, I'll include both of our contact information.
Great stuff. Yeah, and just to cap off, obviously that was an absolute whistle-stop tour in less than 60 minutes of an intro to Bitcoin. There's an incredible amount of information there to digest, especially if you are incredibly new to the scene, and which can be sort of quite overwhelming and seem really confusing. Also, we'll say is, again, feel free to watch back to the recordings. I dare say that a lot more will sink in the second time round once you're familiar with some of the terminology that we used, albeit that we tried to keep it as simple as possible. And equally, we've got our details on screen there as well. So I don't want to speak for Lily, but I'm personally very happy to field any DMs from anybody after the fact if they don't want to ask any questions and they've got any burning desires to gain some Bitcoin knowledge on anything that we've spoken about today. My Twitter handle's there on screen, so feel free to send me a DM on Twitter if there's anything that you wanted to ask that may be a little bit more personal that you didn't want to ask in a public forum. But aside from that, Lily, I'll just let you say some final words before we close out.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for coming to the webinar. I'm also available for contact, so if you want to tweet at me, I'll give you my contact information and shoot you a DM and we can talk.
Great stuff. So we will see you at exactly the same time next week for a talk on self-custody and the importance of self-custody and how you can put that into practice. So with that, I just want to say thanks to Lily and Slim for accompanying me with this one, and thank you to everybody else who was present at the webinar. And thanks again. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Q&A. Thanks, Lily. We appreciate you. Thanks, everybody, for joining. We appreciate it, and give it a good share. And once again, reach out for any questions or comments. Thanks.